You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Welcome back to another exciting edition of TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. If you're a regular listener, you remember that just a couple of weeks ago we had Ben Jones, a.k.a. Cooter, from the Dukes of Hazzard as our guest, and enjoyed thoroughly talking to him. That's exactly who I talked to. I talked to Cooter here a couple weeks ago, and we didn't get into the political end of the conversation. And for those of you who remember that broadcast or who just know who Ben Jones is, you realize that not only was he Cooter on the Dukes of Hazzard, but after that he became Congressman Ben Jones, a member of the House of Representatives who served 2 terms representing a district in Georgia. And so I said on the next interview we'd have him back, and I would talk exclusively to Congressman Ben Jones. And so that's what we're going to do today. We've got Congressman Ben Jones on the telephone line. Congressman Jones, welcome to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour.
Thank you for having me on.
In our last interview, we talked almost exclusively about personal things and your role as Cooter on the Dukes of Hazzard and your acting career and your music career. And so now what I'd like to do in this interview is talk about the politics, about the Southern heritage issues specifically, and what you're doing and what we can be doing to turn the tide in this all-out war against everything Southern, against our culture, against our heritage, against our ancestors, against our history, and kind of to understand your involvement in the fight, what it is that motivates you. We kind of have to know a little bit about your history and your background. So would you tell us a little bit about your ancestors and your childhood and your growing up and how those things have compelled you to be the warrior that you have been for Confederate heritage and also for civil rights? And of course, here a little later in the interview, we'll talk about how they're really one and the same. But if we could just start out, if you could just talk a little bit about your history.
Let me tell you a story I've never told before because I've just learned this in the last months in doing research. There was a man named, a slave named Gabriel Jacobs in Northampton County, Virginia, over on the eastern shore. And he belonged to John Custis, who was later sort of the grandfather of the Custises who, Mary Custis married Lee, Robert E. Lee. And one of the Custises was Martha Washington's first wife. He died, and then she married George. So all these things are tied in historically. Custis freed the slave named Gabriel Jacobs in 1690. He was in his 40s, I think. And that man's son, Primus Jacobs, went to, they never know what these people look like even. There are no photographs or anything. But he went to North Carolina, Primus did, and they had what were called triracial isolates. And these were people of mixed blood who would go back out where they lived in the country, and there were a lot of Native Americans there who were sort of the remnants of those great tribes that had been there before the white people showed up. And some even say they were descendants of the lost colony, from Croatan. But these were, a lot of Indians, and they lived back up in the swamps. They didn't get the best land, but there was intermarriage, and they called them triracial isolates. That's a sociological name for that stuff. So out of that, for a couple of generations, they just listed those folks as non-white. They weren't sure what color they were. But Gabriel Jacobs' great-great-grandson, Noah Jacobs, his daughter Annie Jean married Harley Jenrette, who was fought in the Civil War. She was born about 18 in the 1830s. Her younger brother was named, like that first slave, Gabriel Jacobs, the namesake of the patriot, the one that went way back into the 17th century. And he was killed at Frazier's Farm on the last day of, the Peninsula Campaign, the end of those 7 days, and is buried there. So here you had this black slave getting freed, and let's see, that would be 160 years later, say, his great-great-great-grandson shares his name, dies as a Confederate soldier in the battle around Richmond. So if you understand that story, you understand the South, sort of,
So then what you're telling us is that you're not just the descendant of white Confederate soldiers, you're also the descendant of black Confederate soldiers and of former slaves.
I don't understand. I'm a complicated story. I'm really a mixed race. I have all the races inside me, every planet, every continent. I'm black and American, Native American, and Celtic and Irish, and it was some. I did that DNA thing, and there was somebody in there from Sardinia. So I'm a mutt, but I had interesting history. The way I'd grown up, we were railroad people, and both my grandfathers were railroad men. A lot of great uncles, and my father worked for the Atlantic Coastline Railroad for 50 years. And we grew up in a section house. I was born in North Carolina, but went up to a section house on the docks of Portsmouth, Virginia. I don't know if you know what a section house, a railroad house. It's basically a company house, a mill house sort of thing. But it didn't have any electricity or indoor plumbing. We had an old double-seater outhouse behind the place. And so it's a real primitive kind of thing. And it was on the other side of the tracks in an African-American neighborhood called Sugar Hill. We were the only white folks, quote-unquote, over there. And so I went to school. I'd go across the tracks to the white side, and everything was very segregated. It was all Jim Crow. And as far as people thought back in the 1940s, it was always going to be that way. But in the 60s, as a college student, my conscience led me to get involved in the civil rights movement. And I saw the South change over 10 years from Jim Crow and strict segregation and what people said was white supremacy, although that was a canard, a joke, no human being is supreme to any other. And so I fought for equal rights, and I saw that happen. And when I moved to Atlanta, I saw that in action. It was a very, racially progressive city, and I got to know all those people who had led the civil rights movement and worked with them and befriended them and knew them. So I'd come a long way, from where I grew up, down in Sugar Hill to, television and all that stuff. So I just had an interesting life that way. I wrote a book about it about 10 years ago called Redneck Boy in the Promised Land. And it tells all those stories and the good and the bad, the self-destructive behavior and finding God. But the other part, the historical stuff and the politics, and then the show business experiences that I've had.
So if I understand what I'm hearing correctly, your political career actually started not in the 90s, but even back before your acting career, back when you were in college, and you were a civil rights activist.
Well, no, I didn't start out that way. I was a kind of a feckless college student and alcoholic on top of that, but I had talent. I was a good writer, and I was learning to be an actor, and I was at a great school. I just kind of lucked in there, but I wrote them a letter, and they let me in, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But this is during the civil rights movement. And I just felt like, well, we can't go on with Jim Crow anymore. This guy I know and like, we're walking down the street, him and I can't go in there and eat a cheeseburger together.
Right.
So I was young and politically active, and I said, this has to change. So I got swept up in that, that movement and believed in it and still do. But it applies to everybody. It applies to the descendants of, equal rights means equal rights. It applies to white people and yellow people and red people, to everybody. You just, treat everybody, particularly when it comes to the law, in the same way. And we did that. And the great progress was made in the South. Within a few years, the South was way ahead of any other part of the country, as far as I can tell, in terms of racial relations. In part, great part, because we shared a culture for a couple of 100 years.
Right.
We knew each other. We worked together. We were Southerners. And that was a strong bond. And Dr. King was a Southerner, and he thought that way.
So then what you're saying is that you knew Dr. King and that he had no issue with the Confederate battle flag or with the icons of our Southern heritage.
I went down last year to Morehouse College, which is a black men's school, one of the best in the world, in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's where Dr. King went to school, and his father and his grandfather. And I was asked to speak at a forum there that Andrew Young, who was Dr. King's right-hand man, put on about the Confederate flag. And I was on and the kids were great to me. They listened to everything I had to say, and I got a great response. And there are other people that disagreed with me, and they're all going on about this and that, what we hear every day in the news. And Andy, who knew Dr. King as well as anybody, at the end of it, he says, when the Civil Rights Movement came out of the South, because he agrees with me, that's why he asked me there. He says, when the Civil Rights Movement came out of the South, there was never any mention of Confederate flags or the Civil War or anything. We were trying to build bridges. And when Dr. King said, I have a dream someday the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will dine together at the table of brotherhood. He didn't say anything about tearing down flags or monuments or anything or being offended by that. It wasn't an issue. And that's what Andy said. It was not an issue. Why is it now an issue? It's entirely political.
So why is it that you think then that those on the left would want to tear down, because that's what you're saying they're doing, that they're basically tearing down everything that Dr. King built. What do they gain from that? You'd think they would want
They don't gain anything from it, but they think they gain it. It's sort of like, schoolyard stuff. Bullies, we beat y'all, 8 people show up and they, take it on some, they find problems where they don't exist, and they don't gain a thing by it, as far as I can see. They might feel good for a day, but, they haven't changed anything. They haven't changed anybody's mind. They haven't changed anybody's heart. They haven't changed American history. And it's a slippery slope, too, as everybody is starting to realize. Well, first it was, this flag here at this state capitol. Now it's George Washington is removed from the church that he built and was a deacon in Alexandria, Virginia. It's all over the country. What they're researching. Is that street named after a Confederate soldier? It has to go because it oppresses me. It makes me feel bad. And that's just BS. It's nonsense. And if you're that much of what they call them now, snowflakes, that you see a statue and it just represents history. I mean, what we glorify, when we're glorifying, is the respect that we have for those people and what they did in their leadership, because they were of their time. Yeah, you can look back 150 years later and said, yeah, but they own human beings. Well, we live in the United States of America, and the founders of this country, George Washington, bought and sold human beings. Thomas Jefferson bought and sold human beings. 4 of the first 5 presidents of the United States were Virginia plantation owners, Madison, Monroe, and it goes on. We've had 15 presidents of the United States, and Grant, who had slaves during the Civil War, that his wife. These people want to simplify everything. You're bad, I'm good. You're wrong, I'm right. And when you start doing that, and doing it wholesale, just pouring billions of dollars into this, it is for political advantage, and it's counteractive to the extreme. So yeah, they think they're doing something. What happened in New Orleans was just heartbreaking. And here they're just doing this stuff in the middle of the night like they did in Memphis. Swung some kind of backdoor deal. And
we're going to talk more about this in a minute, but first, a word from our sponsor, The Barnes Review. If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading The Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading The Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In The Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. We're back, and we've got Congressman Ben Jones on the line, talking about Southern heritage, talking about the civil rights movement, and particularly talking about how the civil rights movement has evolved, how it's migrated from what it started out to be into, it's sort of morphed into this Frankenstein movement that's trying to destroy our Southern heritage and our Southern culture. And the congressman is telling us how this new version of the civil rights movement is not only the exact opposite of where the civil rights movement started and what it intended to be. This new civil rights movement, this destruction of our Southern culture and heritage, this cultural cleansing, is actually contrary to and counterproductive to the original goals of the civil rights movement. Congressman?
You know, it's like Drew Young said. When the civil rights movement went out of the South, everything changed, and it started going backwards.
Well, I know the way most people would view this is there's the civil rights movement.
Hmm?
And then now they would see modern-day Cooter, modern-day Ben Jones, and they would say, well, he's a very active advocate for Southern heritage.
Absolutely.
And they
to
would
me, it's all the same thing.
Exclusive of each other, but you're
no, they're not. That's what they want you to think. That's what they want you to think. You know, we got a funny country politically. There's 330 million people in this country, and this is the most entrepreneurial, positive, all the great things. We got resources, we got great people, we got all these cultures come from all over, and we've got great minds and great finance and, you know, military, so we got all that stuff. 330 million people. But when it comes to politics, we've only got two options. We've got the right and we got the left, and we got Democrats and Republicans. It's been that way since Lincoln, over 150 years now. We've only had two choices. Occasionally an independent runs, and if it's got some money behind him, he can do it okay. Ross Perot is an example. I'm thinking, you know, everybody said, well, I didn't like my choices. They didn't like Clinton, they didn't like Trump, and they're just going by, but, you know, how come, you know, why is there so much trouble in Congress? Why are these people never being able to agree on anything? It's because there's two parties. You don't have a third choice come in and say, well, let's use some common sense here. Let's take a different approach. Let's build some, you know, some bridges to each other, not, you know, build a bridge. And I'm for building up walls. Let's build bridges, you know.
Let me interrupt you here, Congressman. I know, of course, we hear that phrase often, build bridges and not walls. I just want to see if this was a Freudian slip here when you accidentally said, let's build walls and not bridges. Were you referring to the Trump wall? And are you for the Trump wall? Are you against the Trump wall? And then we can go back to our other conversation.
I'm for that wall down there because I think we do need to control our borders better. But we need to think about building bridges between each other. And people are sick and tired and fed up with Congress, and it gets worse and worse as more and more special interest money pours into these two parties to control the message. And what has happened is the left has gone further to the left, the right's gone further to the right, and the middle is getting screwed, if you pardon the expression. And people are saying, well, these are the choices, and, you know, and I've been there, and I know 330 million people, and we got two choices that are going to control, and with the media having gotten such enormous power, and with social media suddenly superseding everything in the way we used to do business, it's hard to get the clear message that, look, we're all in this together. We got to get along. We got to look out for each other. We're going to have our differences, but we can sit down and work them out.
So then you think that we can work these differences out, or do you think that America is irreparably divided? Can common sense still prevail? What do you think?
Culturally, America is together, and we work it out individually. But politically, there's an enormous amount, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars being spent to divide us. As far as I can tell, just about all of it's coming from the left. You know, they're kind of winning. And the reason is that they got the microphone. They've got the microphone, they own the television stations, they own the big newspapers, they own the movies, they control music, everything. That, you know, and they're using it for political purposes. You know, because there's some insane cultural cleansing that's going on. Let's destroy that culture because we can. Because we can. We can have our way with these people. And they just, you know, use all that power and money and influence to describe us as hateful people, as bigots, as racist, and any vestige of our heritage, any statue, any flag, any kind remark, any song, anything is immediately Soviet Russia or the Cultural Revolution in China or something. It's like Nazi Germany. Tear that down. Just disappear it. In the freest country in the world, 75 million of us who are descended from the Confederacy are being told that we're evil people and that everything we believed about true history, I mean, it's a complicated history. There's no one point of view that is correct on history. It doesn't work that way. It's life and it's complicated. And anybody who knows the history of the war between the states knows that it wasn't about slavery. I mean, in the end, it was probably the only good thing that came out of it, but it was the end of slavery. But it was a horrible way that it happened.
But I thought that was the whole history of the Civil War, about the evils of slavery and how Honest Abe freed the slaves.
Lincoln, in his first inaugural address, gets up and says, I don't like slavery. You know, in fact, he wanted to get all the black people out of the country and send them to the islands or back to Africa. He didn't like black people. But what he said was, he says, but slavery is constitutionally protected. And I don't care about that. I just want the Union to stay together. He says, in fact, and he's elected president, he's given his first inaugural address, he says, you ought to think about passing the Corwin Amendment, which had been passed in the Buchanan under his administration out of the House and was going out to the states. This is a constitutional amendment that would have made slavery permanent forever. Not even people in the South wanted that, not even the harshest slave owner. That wasn't something that... So that's Lincoln saying one thing out of one side of his mouth and getting ready to attack the South, you know, out of the other side of his mouth. It was, you know, the great disaster of this country. But we have to look at it clearly. He had his flaws. He had enormous flaws. I mean, we all do. We're human beings. And we want to bring people together, Ed. It cannot be done through political ways. In my opinion, it can only be spiritual. And by that, I mean, you know, that we treat each other as we were taught to treat each other. Treat everybody the same, give each individual respect.
So politically speaking, strategically speaking, is it really as simple as the golden rule?
You know, we're all children of God. We're going to live and we're going to die here. Why are we having this terrible historical argument, totally unbalanced? It's a political fight, and it's being driven by people who really don't have the best interest of our nation and of brotherhood and of racial reconciliation in their hearts. They want to divide people, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. That's my sermon for the day, brother.
I find it funny that you would refer to that as a sermon. What is the acronym for Bible? Basic instructions before leaving Earth? You know, the truth is that there's not a lot of depth to this. It's just simple stuff. God gave it to us so that we could live here. Did you ever read The Art of the Deal? I know years ago I read The Art of the Deal. And I remember thinking when I read it, of course, Donald Trump was not the president at the time. But I remember when I read the book, I'm thinking, a lot of this stuff I learned in Sunday school. Basic truths on how we could get along with one another. Maybe that's the solution. Maybe we need to get the president to negotiate this deal. What do you think about that?
Politics is the art of compromise. And when people won't compromise, the whole thing falls apart. And we're there now. And the country, you know, is in trouble, in my opinion.
So are we past the point of dialogue then? I mean, what do we do?
If people want your respect, they need to give respect. These are old, ancient Judeo-Christian principles. They're also in every other religion in the world. You get back what you give out. They call that karma. If you're nice to people, they're nice to you. If you treat them, you're a bigot, you're this, you're that, I'm going to tear down this, you got to hide that painting of your grandfather. As if a symbol could only mean one thing, too. That's how narrow-minded it is. Symbols mean, the symbol of the Confederate battle flag is a Christian cross, St. Andrew's cross. Christ's first disciple who was crucified in a spread eagle position, which is why we have that called a Scottish cross, and it's on flags all over the world. So we honor that too. It's insane what's going on, and even though every poll, just about every poll, except the ones run by CNN and people like that, show, even one of them they ran, that even a majority of black people oppose this cultural cleansing. And they understand that it is counterproductive and that it's divisive. I mean, everybody understands this, yet it continues on. It's media-driven. It has nothing to do with the culture. It has everything to do with politics.
I want us to dig deep there, Ben, but before we do, let's break for just a moment. Have a word from another one of our sponsors, the American Free Press.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
And we're back again with Congressman Ben Jones. Right before the break, we were talking about how the left has weaponized the media to use it against us to destroy our culture. And by the media, I'm not just talking about the news media, the newspapers, the news broadcasts, but all aspects of media, our music, our movies, our television programs, pretty much all forms of entertainment.
The sort in which has happened, when that powerful media is basically 90% of the media leans to the left, and some of them not only leans, but are just completely over. And that's what the message we get is. I can't find anything on TV where they're not attacking me, my people, my thoughts. I've always been a progressive guy, Like I said, I was in the civil rights movement. I was a Democrat, and now I go on these shows and I start people yelling in my face and talking about what a bigot I am, and I'm going, wait a minute. 75 million Americans are descended from the Confederacy. That's 1 out of 4 of us.
Right.
About, something like 1 out of 4 Americans is descended from the Confederacy. We understand that was a complicated thing. We know who won and who lost, but we're going to honor our people and their courage. And that's all this is about. But for modern people using all those technologies of social media and all their power of the media that they have, the big media, they're calling the shots. And to say this is Orwellian is an understatement. Orwell said, whoever controls the past controls the future. Basically, that what has happened, what he predicted would happen, has happened.
So can we counterattack using the same strategy? I mean, if, the big media companies could weaponize entertainment and use it against us and against our culture, could we use entertainment in the same manner? For example, could the Dukes of Hazzard be weaponized, kind of a counterattack weapon?
It's a component, has become, because of politics, a component of the fight, that we're all in about our heritage. And so, I haven't blinked on this. I said, every time they take one of these flags down, we're going to put 2 of them up. And that's sort of what's happening.
Well, I know one of the things that I understand you're doing, and I know a lot of things go back to the Dukes of Hazzard theme, but when Warner Brothers stopped producing Dukes of Hazzard merchandise, I understand it that you picked up the production yourself.
No, can't do that, but we did buy what they had left. What we do is we sort of have our own brand of Cooter stuff. We have for over, how long has it been? 20 years now, we have bought licensed products. Warner Brothers licensed all these products. Well, a lot of them are still out there, and we buy whatever we can because people know that they can then get these things. Like we bought, there was one more run of cars. They're going to make one more. It was announced that this will be the last production of the cars, the 1/24th scale, beautiful General Lee cars. So we got everyone that we could. Came out of China, of course, right? But we bought everyone that we could because, our venue is a Dukes of Hazzard venue. It's a museum in honor of that show and the cast and all the things around it. And we serve the fans of the show. So, we try to keep it going. But we have Cooter stuff. In 01, you can't license a number, so we do things like that. But we've been very careful over the years to not to infringe on their licensing, which is just a matter of law. If they want to get you, they can, But we've had a great relationship with Warner Brothers over the years.
I don't know. I can remember a few times when you were on Fox News and you were letting the Warner Brothers executives know in no uncertain terms that they were just on the wrong side of this thing.
We'll let them know when we thought they were wrong. When they, really, I've organized people to, emails and things like that to protest some of the decisions they made in recent years about the show. For what that's worth, and they hear us. To me, as capitalism is supposed to be, if there's a demand, there should be a supply, and there's definitely a demand. Like I said, people love the Dukes of Hazzard, not just here, but all over the world. So we provide that service for them, and it has. Our business has actually gotten better since all this stuff started. People said, because a majority of the American people are on our side. It used to be in democracies that having a majority meant something. But it doesn't seem in this case the tail is wagging the dog, if you know what I mean. It's a minority viewpoint, financed by literally hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars from people like George Soros and others who are calling the shots rather than the American people. So there we are. But I get along fine with Warner Brothers, and had the best days of my life were spent on that lot doing the Dukes. So, you know, I think that, of course, it's a whole different bunch of people that run it there. But those media people, you know, they cave. They'll cave in a heartbeat, you know. So, and they've done that, in my opinion.
So do you think they'll vacillate? They've caved one day, and then one day we'll see on TV that it's back?
I hope I can live that long. I think Netflix is showing it. There's a few other outlets where you can watch the Dukes of Hazzard, but mostly, you know, the DVDs are still there. And they didn't stop selling those, thank goodness. So that's the way, I think probably a majority of the people don't watch their as much DVDs and other, you know, and Netflix and things online as watch, you know, television, cable television. I mean, there's a way to get it if you want to get it, and those DVDs we sell a lot of them, and you know, so and in every other country in the world, like I say, the Dukes is still there. And I think in time, it may not be in my lifetime, but in time, people will totally reassess this whole politically correct thing that's going on right now, and say, you know, we were wrong, and maybe even say, well, you know, history is complicated. And you know, this is the passion of the moment going on here. And when people get a little more distance and retrospect on this issue, they're going to come back around and say, you know, that was good entertainment, and we need entertainment like that.
And you've definitely provided some great entertainment for us over the years. Do you think that that's been a positive thing? In other words, do you think that the Dukes of Hazzard, do you think that the things you've done since the Dukes of Hazzard, things like Duke Fest, things like Cooter's Last Stand, things like the weekly concerts that you're doing with Cooter's Garage Band, Cooter's Place, are they just entertainment offerings, or are they more than that? Are they actually part of what is helping us to reclaim our heritage and to advance our Southern culture? What is their impact?
Now, I do these big shows. We do, you know, get people together. They come from all over the country, and they're all shades of people there, and they're all cultures of people. And they all sit down, and they got one thing in common. They love the Dukes of Hazzard, and they love a good time, and they love good music. And we get up and carry on, and we get out here in the world. People are getting along fine. The races get along fine. We work together. And in the South, more than anywhere else in the world, we've had a multiracial culture. I was eyewitness to that. We worked next to each other. We shared food. We shared the weather. We shared all those things, you know, music. And we understood the differences, but we're Southerners. That's the important thing.
We've got one more commercial that we need to squeeze in here. And you're going to love this one, Congressman, because you're the star of this commercial. It's a commercial for one of your Cooter's Place stores. It's about 30 seconds long, and then after that, we'll be back with Congressman Ben Jones.
Breaker one, might be crazy, but I ain't dumb. Crazy Cooter coming at you. Hey, y'all, got your ears on? Well, I got some news for you. We're here at our brand new Cooters in the Country store in Sperryville, Virginia. Good old Sperryville, where Cooters started many years ago. Folks are coming from all over Hazzard County, and we're going to have a grand old time with good music, good food, and best of all, good friends. Hope y'all can be there. Whoop, whoop, here come Enos. Huck got Cletus with him. I'm down and I'm gone.
And we're back with Congressman Ben Jones. We've been talking for the last half an hour or so about Confederate heritage and the Civil Rights Movement, the attempts by some to hijack the Civil Rights Movement to use it as a weapon to cleanse the culture of all things Southern, to purge and change the history of our country, which, of course, we can't do that. You can rewrite the history books, but the history itself doesn't change. We've been talking about a lot during the last half hour, and for the next 20 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about some very specific things. And in order to set the stage for that, Congressman, I want to ask you specifically, you told us a little bit about your ancestors and your personal history, but could you tell us specifically about your Confederate ancestors? They are, after all, a great part of your motivation in your activism for Southern heritage. So tell us a little bit about your ancestors.
Everybody, as far as I know, all of my ancestors of that generation fought for the South, and some of them died for the South.
Go ahead and personalize them for us. Tell us just a little bit about them. Who were they?
Well, there's a lot of them. Great-grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers going back. I can tell you, Harley Jenrette was with the Waccamaw Rifles down there on the North Carolina-South Carolina line. William Stevens fought. My mother was a Stevens. And that goes back to the Jenrette thing and the Jacobs thing. And I'm trying to think of the other fellow's name. But the great-grandfathers. And so, you know, if you got those people, all four of my direct great-grandfathers served. And so then you start getting into their brothers and their nephews and their cousins. And, you know, so it's basically like, and that includes the Jacobs, who were descended from slavery, you know, were African slaves. So it's a complicated thing. But to me, and that's what got me involved in the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And I served for a year or so as a heritage defense coordinator, heritage defense, and that was when all this broke. And I was able to give that a year, and it basically became sort of a full-time thing. But that's been taken care of very well now. It's a great organization, and those guys do a terrific job. Anyhow, yeah, I just say all of them fought for the South, and everybody since.
That's an interesting word, since. Are you implying that Reconstruction is still ongoing?
The way I figure it right now, the battle that we're in, and I don't think we can lose it because we're not going to change. We're going to be who we are. We're going to say what we think. We're going to fly our flags. We're going to honor our ancestors. And we understand the South, well, Southerners are all kinds of people. They're white people, they're red people, they're black people, they're brown people, and all shades in between. We're Southerners, and we share a culture. What is happening now, in my opinion, is entirely political.
The Confederate flag, Congressman, what does it represent?
And a symbol, you know, means different things to different people in different contexts. That flag, around the world, is a flag used by people revolting against, autocracies all over the world. You see that flag show. That flag has been used by my ancestors in world wars. You know, carried their flag from back home. That cross is, and there's the Dukes of Hazzard, which was a beloved show by every race and creed in the country. There's the, flag at Gettysburg. There are these flags that fly over these battlefields in historic contexts. And so it means different things to different people in different contexts. I am offended when the Ku Klux Klan shows up waving that flag, because that's an insult to the good people of my family who fought under that flag so courageously. It was the soldier's flag, and you don't even have to argue the causes of that war or who was right and who was wrong. And, it was a tragic thing. But, that flag was a soldier's flag, and that's what it represents. So to me, it represents the spirit, the independent spirit of the Southern people, of the South. And that means all of us. It ain't about color, it ain't about race. It's about being Southern. It's a cultural thing. It's a positive thing.
Well, I can tell that this is definitely something that's firing you up. Were you always
Well, it has to. But we're all fired up. We're all fired up, and that's something these people don't understand, is that when you start messing with people's families and their graves and their monuments and our memories, I'm not one of those guys that argues the South was right about everything and slavery was this and that. It was a terrible thing, and particularly if you were a slave, and segregation was bad. If you were black, these weren't good experience. We changed that. We've accepted these things, and the South has led in that, in those efforts. The most segregated cities in America are not in the South. So this is setting back the progress that we made. But, when you start messing with people's ancestors, if you start messing with their folks, with their blood, with their kin, which is what these political leftists are doing, then you're going to make people mad. And our challenge is to stay cool. You know what I'm saying? Is stay cool. We're right. Time will take care of some of this. Those people will move on to other things, and then we'll reclaim our families. I think one thing we need to do in a practical way is not worry so much about these public monuments, because they're going to be anywhere there's a majority Democratic, a majority minority, where a city, say, is 60, 70% black, and there's an old statue down there, they're going to win that one politically. What we need to do is to move those statues to private property where they will be protected, and to build monuments, as so many people are doing now. The Virginia Flaggers and other groups like that are putting up flags and monuments to say we're not going anywhere. In fact, we're still here, and you can't touch this one. The law protects this one. You see what I'm saying? And so we need to just move this as an internal thing, get together, we need to clear out and get racism out of our movement. It brings us down here in Charlottesville, which is just below me. For a year, every day, Confederate heritage people were down there doing informational things, protecting, from here Southerners, making a little progress, eyeballing people. And then suddenly all these American Nazis and KKK types, these racists, show up from Indiana and Ohio and New Hampshire and places like that.
So these people aren't even Southerners then? You're saying that these racists and these neo-Nazis and neo-Confederates and neo-whatevers the news media keeps throwing into our face, the ones that instigated the violence at Charlottesville, the ones that are making us look bad in front of the television cameras, you're saying that they're not even Southerners. You're saying that these are Yankees.
And they don't know what we're talking about. They go down there, start a huge riot, and once again, the media gives them the opportunity to say, see, New York Times and the Washington Post and CBS and all these people say, see, that's what we told you. They're racist. They're, radical. They're Nazis. And some of those people were. A lot of them were. But that's not us. That's not the 75 million people who, honor, like I do, my family who fought and who love the South and all of its people. And that's the message we need to get out, and that's what I think we're doing.
You've definitely been an effective bearer of that message, and once again, I'd like to thank you for doing it. To those who would be critical, to those who would say, we're just refighting the Civil War, we need to get over it, what would you say to them?
The war between the states was the crucible of American history. Everything that went before led up to it. Everything that has come after has been affected by it. And we need to look at this in a way. I think the worst thing that happened in terms of a lot of this stuff was that Ken Burns thing. It was great in a way and created a lot of interest in the Civil War. But his view was just typical Northeastern liberal Democrat, someone who was not of the South. They had Shelby Foote on there, who was terrific on that show, but they needed more of him. But it was sort of a tactic. It's called Stonewall Jackson, maybe the most Christian man who ever lived in this country, called him a stone cold killer. Well, he was a soldier who did his duty fearlessly, but they maligned him. And he was a great, great man. And so, of course, was General Lee. These were men of their time and their generation, just like we are, just like these people running around, opposing us. They're of their time. They're of their generation. But a lot of these people don't take the long view of American history or of world history. In other words, they're uninformed. And when suddenly there's millions of them and they're chanting and using slogans and tearing things down and spray painting them, you ain't gonna make any friends like that. You don't build harmony and brotherhood with that. And that's what the Civil Rights Movement was about, harmony and brotherhood, putting the past behind us and understanding it, and understanding not just our different experiences, but our shared experiences.
I know that you were one of the first subscribers to Dixie Heritage, because I remember the newsletter had been out for just 2 or 3 weeks, and I got an email from you, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. I got an email from Cooter.
Well, we're all, there's a network of folks. If we can all get on the same page, I think, it would be more effective. But there's a network of folks, all of us. As soon as this started happening, you and others, and literally tens and hundreds of thousands of us had to go back, to war, basically. And this is a war on behalf of our heritage, our culture, our ancestors. and for America. I don't want to live in America where some group can suddenly get up and say, take down that statue, take down that flag. You should be ashamed of your people rather than proud of them. You know, that destroys respect for each other. How can I respect somebody to holler in my face like that? It's wrong, and when something's wrong, you got to stand up to it. And we're all doing that. And I'm honored to share that with you and with all of us who are fighting this fight. Because it's not just for the South or for our ancestors. It is for the principles of the American experience.
Well, I definitely think that that you've been on the front line of this for years, probably 20 years now.
Well, actually, my whole life. I mean, I knew, I made a decision at one point, I want to stay in the South. I don't want to go to New York, Los Angeles. It's all right, but I don't like it there. I want to be a part of the South and bringing the South to a place where it competes with New York and Los Angeles and those places, in the arts and in the media and in culture and politics and everything. We've done that, but we don't, Ted Turner had Turner South and all that. Well, he sold it. He sold it to Hollywood. He sold it to Time Warner. And ever since then, we really haven't had a spokesman for our region, a national voice, of reason. We get defined by people who don't live here. And that's something we need to change. And that's something that people could do. A coalition or, Southern businessmen could get together and, say, wait a minute, let's create a network, that speaks for us and speaks for the best of the South and for all Southerners. Not, CNN had that, but that's been gone for a long time, and now it's become sort of one of the worst offenders of the anti-Southern sentiment. So that's what we're up against, and I enjoy having people like you in the fight with us here.
Well, thank you.
It'll take some time. These things, don't happen overnight, but I believe it's turning right now. I think it's starting to turn our way as those people, the left and our opponents and enemies, get more and more radical. People react to that and say, now they've gone too far. Well, obviously the whole thing has been going too far. And we have to hold politicians accountable, left and right. There are a lot of, used to be, I'm an independent man. There are Republicans that have sold us out too. It's happened in South Carolina. That wasn't a Democratic legislature that passed that thing. So we got to hold them accountable and say, this isn't you cannot. I mean, I've said this 3 or 4 times already in this interview, but we're to behave that way culturally. When you start attacking history and symbols and defining them and saying it can only be one way, then what you've created is a system much like the communist Chinese or the Soviets, saying it can only be one way. That's insane. We're a multicultural, multi-political, and multi-intellectual country. Every American has the right to think any way that he or she wants to, independently, to come to their own conclusions. And there's hate. There's people who are extreme, and we recognize that. And we, don't associate with that. But we're just regular people. We're good-hearted Americans. Pay our taxes, fought in all the wars, believe in doing right, go to church, and we're being treated like dogs. So it's wrong, and it's imperative. It's our duty to stand up.
Is there anything that you wanted to say that I didn't give you a chance to say or didn't ask about? Or
well, I don't know. Just get a hold, CootersPlace.com, Cooter's Place Facebook, and that'll tell you what we're up to. Just everybody that hears this to just remember that there are a whole lot of us. There are tens of millions of us in this fight. And in the end, if we stick to our guns and our beliefs and don't compromise them in any way by caving in or by letting our anger control us, generalizing, like when we can get back to, person-to-person level rather than all this sort of demonizing and sloganeering, then we'll be able to have a good conversation with our enemies. But we all have to do. We can't let the worst elements of our coalition take over. And just keep on the high road and keep putting one foot in front of the other and standing up to them. I'll look forward to the day when we all get the award for bringing common sense and compassion back to the country instead of this extremism and political correctness. That's our fight. It's real simple. We're fighting for the same things that people fought for in the American Revolution and in the war between the states and on and on. And our families, our Southern families, white, black, whoever, have given so much. Those descendants of those who fought for the South have contributed to every conflict this country's had. We have shed our blood. We've shed our blood against communism, and we shed our blood against Nazism. And we've given so much, and now, once as I said, we're being treated like dogs. And as we say around here, that dog don't hunt. We're going to stand up to that. And that's what we're doing. So, anyhow, thank you for having me on. I sure appreciate it. Enjoyed the chat. Loosened up my tonsils this morning.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of the day. And
great. Thanks, Ed. My thing is, how they used to say the South will rise again. I said, no. The South is always rising.
That's a good place to leave it right there.
Okay. Thanks a lot, man.
Yes.
Take care.
God bless.
You too. Bye.
That was our second interview with Congressman Ben Jones, a.k.a. Cooter from the Dukes of Hazzard. Definitely enjoyed having a second conversation with the congressman. Always an enjoyable time to converse with him. And I want to encourage you, as we come to the end of the broadcast this week, go to the internet, type in www.cootersplace.com. Check out Cooter's Place. Check out all the things that Ben Jones is out there doing right now. And be sure to look at the bookstore and check out Ben's new book. Awesome reading material. And then go to www.dixieheritage.net. Check out our website. Sign up for the free newsletter. We'd love to send that to you every week. Absolutely no cost, no obligation. And when you sign up for that, I'll also send you a free copy of my best-selling book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. And while you're there, go to the contact page, shoot me an email, give me a little personal note, let me know who you are, where you live, and how you're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. And so I'm looking at my watch here, and I see that we have a little over 2 minutes left in the hour. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with Cooter's Garage Band singing the theme song from the Dukes of Hazzard, Just a Good Old Boy. And for those of you who have downloaded this off the internet, and you're on a computer right now, chances are you have a video file, and you can actually watch. Hopefully you're watching and not just listening to the broadcast this week. And so you can actually see a little video tour of Cooter's Place and the Dukes of Hazzard Museum.
Just two good old boys, never meaning no harm. Beats all you never saw, been in trouble with the law since the day they was born. Straightening the curves, flattening the hills. Someday that mountain might get them, but the law never will. 'Cause they're making their way the only way they know how. That's just a little bit more than the law will allow. Two good old boys, they wouldn't change if they could. They're fighting that system like a two modern day Robin Hoods. And they're making their way